Hello, greetings SM1 honor students. Today we're going to begin Unit 3, which is going to be about more functions, especially linear relationships. So today is lesson 3.1, first set of notes. And our content objectives are going to be understand when a function is linear. So we want to know, by looking at a function, how do we know when it's linear? Build equations that calculate the y value and the x value for an equation, and then build a working definition of linear relationship. And what does that mean? So let's begin with our first few examples. We're just going to be looking at some models of some functions. So if I look at this first example here, I've got some points that are plotted on an XY coordinate axis. And I have a data table over here that's showing me those X's and Y's. And I want to just kind of go through and see what we've got for each of those. So let's go to the lowest one. So if we go down here, this is X is negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're at X is negative 9. And Y is at negative 6. So we're going to fill that in. And then for the next one, X is negative 6. Fill that in. X value, and Y is negative 4. And then we're just going to continue filling in these domain values, the X values, and the range values, the Y values. So when X is negative 3, Y is negative 2. When X is 0, Y is also 0. And when X is 3, you can see that Y is 2. And when X is 6, Y is 4. And when X is 9, Y is 6. Okay? So now if we look at these values, we want to figure out what would be an equation that calculates the value of y anytime we're given x. So basically we want to develop a function, right? F of x, f of x. Well, what will f of x equal? Well, based on this relationship that I'm seeing, it would appear that every time I go over by 1, or in this case, every time I go over by 3, x goes up by 2. I go over another 3, x goes up by 2. I go over by another 3, x goes up by 2. So every 3 times for every 3 x's that I go over, I go up 2 y's. Well, what is that relationship? Well, that relationship is 2/3 of whatever x is, right? If we think about that, if I put in x is 9, well, what's 2/3 of 9? 2/3 of 9 is 6. So every time I go over 3, I go up 2. And so 2/3, every time I go over 3, I go up 2, okay? And that's our relationship for this function. All right, let's move on and look at some others. Okay, so this next one is fairly similar to the one we just looked at. I'm going to actually circle these in so we can see these dots a little bit better here on the screen. Now, if we look at this, very similar to the last one, the last relationship, only this time we're looking at, again, look at the lowest x value, and again, it appears to be negative 9. So when x is negative 9, but this time when x is negative 9, y is negative 3. So I'm going to put in negative 3. And when x is negative 6, just like we had in the last one, but now y is negative 1. We can go through and we can continue filling in these values, right? So when x is negative 3, y is 1. Okay, negative 3, 1. When x is 0, y is 3. So if we're at 0, we go up to 3. When x is 3, y is 5. And when x is 6, y is 7. And when x is 9, y is also 9. So now we want to think about what's the relationship here. Can we come up with an equation that calculates the value of y if you're given an x? Well, again, we're coming up with a function, f of x. So what does f of x equal here? Well, this is a little bit different than the last one. If you remember the last function, every time we went over 3, we went up 2. In this case, it's a little different than that, okay? So if I look here, if I'm at 0, I'm at 3. So that means even at 0, I'm starting with 3. So that means no matter what, I'm adding 3 to whatever this is, okay? And now let's look at what happens. So I start at 3. If I go over 3, oh, I go up 2 again. If I go over 3, I go up 2. If I go over 3, I go up 2. So it's still very similar. We've got 2/3 x, just like the last function, 2/3 x, but I add 3 each and every time. And you'll see, even if I take it all the way back to the original, that makes sense. If I take it back to -9, so if x is -9, so if I put -9 in for x, well, 2/3 of -9 is -6. But then if I take -6 plus 3, that drops me to -3, and that's the point that I'm at. If I continue, that's the association or the relationship that I have each time. All right, let's try one more. All right, so if we look at this one, I'm going to fill in these dots again, make them a little easier to see. And let's look at the association. So again, if we look at our first x value going this way, we've got x is at -3. And when x is at -3, y is 9. And then the next one is at -2. So when x is at -2, y is 4. When x is -1, y is 1. And when x is 0, y is also 0. And when x is 1, y is 1. When x is 2, y is 4. And when x is 3, y is 9. So you'll notice for this one, so again, we want to come up with an equation that calculates the value of y for a given x. Well, if we look, notice I had -3 and I got 9. Well, what is that? That's, if I square -3, I get 9. -2, I get 4. Again, if I square -2, I get 4. So all of these are the squares of these numbers, whether they're positive or negative. So that means my function is going to be f of x is equal to x squared. And that's our function, right? And so these are just a few examples of using graphical data and putting it into a table and then finding a function based on the data that we're seeing, okay? This is the end of the first video for lesson 3.1.